Welcome to Attorney911, the podcast. With attorney Ralph Manginello. Let's get some answers to the most asked questions. We break down the legal issues and provide expert advice to help you navigate life's legal challenges. You might even call us your first responder to a legal emergency. Up next, real-world cases, valuable insights, and practical tips you can use today. It's time to get smart like a lawyer.
Ryan.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm glad to be here. Been looking forward to this.
I'm so glad. I know. You were my inspiration. Of course, not for just this, but for many things. But really happy to have you on as one of our first guests on the Attorney911 podcast. I would like to introduce you to, all of our. I think we have 500 followers, which I don't know if that's a lot or not. Probably not. But Ryan Krueger, good friend of mine, very good friend of mine, outstanding financial advisor, burgeoning golfer, hoops fanatic, and just an all-around amazing person. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on.
My brother, in so many ways. I'm glad to be here.
My brother. Awesome. So just to get right into it, I know I had talked to you before about coming on because I, for one, had never really financial planned for myself. And when you and I, started becoming friends and I learned, more about what you do and became interested in how I could not only just, start saving my money, but, working towards being what I think, what I think the definition of wealthy is. So it's not just saving money, but creating wealth for yourself. And then which leads to what your company does and what you do and what you have a passion for is getting people to their freedom day, which is, I'll let you explain what that is. But, when I came to you first and I said, what do I do? What do I get started? You were like, well, it depends on where you are in life and, all those questions and answers. But if you could, for just the average, listener and person that you meet on the street, and they say, well, I don't know what it means, to start building wealth and start, taking care of myself financially, tell them about the beginning, briefly, like where that all starts and then what, your definition of Freedom Day is, because I love that.
Well, I think anybody listening to this at any stage and any age needs to realize what we're all up against. And I escaped Wall Street so I could tell simpler truths, but they manufacture confusion. And I think what happens is it becomes intimidating to have this conversation. It feels inaccessible. It feels like you got to wait till I have enough to be able to invest. And one of the many reasons I love you, and I'd never played golf in my life until you taught me how. But if you see Ralph with the president of a country club or the guy that is cleaning somebody's shoes, and he'd never have him clean his own shoes because Ralph and I do that ourselves. But he would be just as likely to play and talk to either one of those. And that's what I love about you, and that's how I feel about investing. It should not be any different. So one of the dirty little secrets is there is no secret. So I escaped Wall Street because when I worked at the largest bank and brokerage firm in the world at the time, when I said manufactured confusion, they want it to feel like there's a wizard behind the curtain that you have to pay all this money and all this anxiety and only he or she can figure it out. And the reality is anybody can do this. And I had to escape to even be able to communicate that message. I wasn't allowed to write your partner. I wasn't allowed to say, here's where 100% of my own money is, which at that time wasn't very much. And we'll talk about why this is so accessible. To this day, that's my only sworn oath to anybody. I'm going to show you where all of my money is, exactly how all this works. And so this simple farm to table organic ingredients, the first couple simple pieces of advice for anybody listening to this is bank yourself, which is what I did when I left the biggest bank. But even if you're just starting to invest, what I mean by that is if you start cutting out that confusion and those toxic layers and fees and unnecessary taxes and costs and kind of the unforced errors, right? If you just removed those,
Right.
that nest egg will magically compound at any size more than if you pick the right stock or fund. And so specifically what I mean by that, and it's the stuff that nobody likes talking about, no investment money manager thinks it's fun to talk about, but there's $6 to $7 billion, Ralph, in overdraft fees, a bank's polite way of saying bounce check fees each year. In some cases, between those fees and the sweep where a bank or brokerage will take savings, just simple cash savings that our parents thought you get to earn a little interest. There's a community bank. We're doing good for each other, and they're going to take good care of our money. That deal was broken a long time ago. And now some of these guys are sweeping savings into lower yielding, unless you see it and ask, and nobody's trained to do that. You're not supposed to be a forensic accountant if you're too busy working and taking care of your family. Between overdraft fees and sweeping into lower yielding, that's the majority of banks' earnings, believe it or not. And then you add on top of that $1 trillion of credit card debt in this country. And again, it's something most people don't like talking about, but before you invest and before you worry about what to do with extra savings, make darn sure you're not accidentally, even for a couple of months, paying 17 or 18 or 25% on an unnecessary debt, because that is a guaranteed 25% return. And sneak preview, there's no fund, not the best of the world, not even ours, can do 25% a year, guaranteed. So if you just eliminate those, I call it the rule of holes. When in one, stop digging. And some people would say that, okay, it's easy for a guy like you to say that. But the real simple math that you don't need an investment advisor for is take the back of an envelope. You do not need Excel. You do not need a budget. You do not need a spreadsheet. And it's not fun to talk about, but if you spend less than you make, you're going to have a very difficult time in this country if you want to work hard and save a little bit of not doing exceptionally well.
Right.
But that's easier said than done. And I say easy for me to say, I started in the mailroom on Wall Street at $23,000 a year. And at that point, I spent a little less than I made. I didn't have a lot to invest. So your message, which I love and why I wanted to do this, yes, anybody can do this.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you covered so much there. So I'm going to try to dive into some of it. But one of the things is, okay, so everyone can do this. So I don't have a big office, but there's about 10 of us total, and in varying different salaries and hourly wages. And so I'm always trying to talk to my employees who I consider family and say, look, I don't know what you're doing to start saving or, creating wealth for yourself for your long term. Because some of my employees are in their 20s, some are in their 30s, some in their 40s, some are in their 50s. And I'm saying, but you have to do something. So I think what you were saying is, first of all, get rid of your credit card debt, right? Obviously. But then explain, I think, to, people are like, oh, that, how do I do that? I mean, what's the simplest way besides, I think you're saying back of an envelope, but explain, real quickly, like what can somebody do making, let's say $50,000 a year do, starting today to start paying that off?
And I cringe a little bit. I've seen fortunes made in my industry helping people get out of debt, which is all these products and all these solutions. You don't need any of them. Just the rule of holes, stop digging. So what that means, first of all, knock out your highest interest, not your lowest balance. It'll make you feel better. Your highest interest first. But all of this takes a back seat to, when you talk about young workers, I've had them at our shop here too. And a lot of them want to, hey, what was your secret? How do you do this? And before you even get there to those decisions of debt and investments, I mean, again, I'm going to say this one last time, because anybody listening to this really is the magic hiding in plain sight that nobody wants to take. So when they asked me what my secret was, well, when I made $23,000 a year, I lived in a really, am I allowed to curse on this podcast, Ralph?
Absolutely.
I lived in a really shitty apartment, and it made me I loved working 6 days a week. But some people, whether they think they're spending too much or not, they are spending more than they make. They live in a high-rise condo inside the loop, and they like to go out and get in it. That's great. And if you can do that, wonderful. But I'm just here to tell you that the secret is to spend a little less than you make first and foremost. And then once you do that, if you have an extra $100, you'll start knocking out any of those debts. But then to your credit and your other point, when you are able to work at a place that takes care of you like family and you have a retirement plan of any kind, or even if you don't, your own IRA or Roth, the very, very next step after you get out of the hole, after you bank yourself, is pay yourself first. Any amount, when you set up a 401k like you did, all of a sudden that $100, Ralph, instead of getting to somebody's bank account where they're not paying them any interest and they go decide to buy too much car or too much condo or entertain themselves, before they can even do that, that $100 is actually $65, right? After taxes, give or take.
Right.
Versus if you pay yourself first, that $100 in your IRA or 401k, that entire $100 goes into your account that starts compounding. So that's where I mean the simple back of the envelope math before you even get into any of the extra stuff. If you pay yourself first and you're not digging a hole, you will, and it takes a while. If you're willing to play the long game. And then the only other close cousin to that advice, your work, your career arc, your earnings power will have significantly more to do with your investment success than which fund you pick. And too many times, people that may not really love their work are focused and then they have anxiety about the stock market, and it's not that.
Right. So, I mean, I think, and I've heard this before, I actually did this many, many years ago, but I literally took the credit cards out of my wallet and just cut them and threw them in the trash and just used debit and cash for, I don't know if it was a year, 2, 3, or however many it was, until I just didn't spend, I only could spend the money I had or less than. But it was a hard lesson to learn because when you're young, I think you're like, oh, well, I'll earn more money later, or I'll start saving later, or I'll do whatever later. But, there's tons of Instagram stuff. And luckily people like you, they're saying, look, if you're 25 years old and you have a job making whatever, if you can just put $10 each week into that IRA account after you get out of debt, over 30, 40, 50 years, you're going to end up, compounding and, being a quote unquote rich person just by doing this bare minimum.
And I'm going to give a little candy if you've gotten through all that broccoli. Here's a little good news, brother. And you know it. And it's frankly my favorite part of my gig here. And when you ask about Freedom Day, because it's available to anybody, right? But it's based more on their choices than their investment decisions, right? Because Freedom Day is when your incoming inflows, when that mailbox, the green flag points down, who our artist said, it feels like the only one in the neighborhood without the red flag pointing up with more bills going out. Once your income exceeds your expenses with enough cash cushion left over, and you don't have to retire at 75. That's why you'll never hear me say retirement plan, because Freedom Day could be at 50. Right. Some people love working, they can't stop it maybe at 90, but Freedom Day is when income exceeds outflows, and it's really, really that simple of the math. But the good news and the dessert after the broccoli would be, and it's one of the things we have in common, and I love, and I've seen blue collar guys and gals make more than the blue chip guys and gals. And I very specifically mean that. We have a secretary, we have an HVAC repairman, we have a meter reader at a utility, we have a plumber, we have a roofer, we have an iron worker. One thing they all have in common, and I'm just hand picking a few because we have pictures of all these adventures in the next room over here. Every single one of those people that comes to mind when you and I were talking about this and making this more accessible to everybody, every one of them that I just mentioned, that doctors and attorneys and professionals might look down their nose, and one of them comes here their last day, and it's the kind of guys that have their names stitched on their uniforms. Every one that I just mentioned is a millionaire. A millionaire, hourly workers, a millionaire. The secretary has more than the attorney she used to work for. And
I love that.
That lights me on fire. And I love that. And anytime anybody in this country points out all the things that are wrong, and I'm not ignoring them, but brother, there is sure a lot more right.
Absolutely. And I mean, and that's, one of the things that drew us, to becoming friends is growing up blue collar in the hard work that gets you to where you need to be, but also that we have that hope, for people. And if people are willing to listen and grind it out, we love the grind, put some money where it's supposed to be, let it compound, then they can reach their Freedom Day and I know you and I talk about that all the time, and gritty stories and just great stories about people like you were just explaining, reaching their freedom day. And I just love that story.
I mean, you do need, and why I cling tightly, why I don't use that word brother lightly. I mean, we do need each other. You need guides, you need experts. When something happens, they call you, but we need each other. And I will just say the only other required ingredient to that long game is, because we all have people that surround, there's all sorts of bad news and reasons to be worried. And some people use it as an excuse not to invest, or well, you do have to have some element, and I'm not even going to call it optimism. I call it reality, because there's just a lot more good than bad. But if you're not willing to believe that the standard of living will increase over your lifetime, then don't invest in nickel, move to another country. But for those of us left that believe there's a lot more good, and people will laugh at me and make fun of me, but I start every day in carpool yelling, the last couple little ones that I get to drive is, we will attack this day with a relentless enthusiasm unknown to mankind, usually right before or after I've gotten off the phone with you doing the exact same thing as big kids, because we do need that.
Relentless enthusiasm. Exactly. I tell my kids the same thing, but I got it from you, so I'm getting credit here.
It does take that, though, because there's a lot of reasons, if you have any doubt, that you'll be pushed around. And so we will share some stoic quotes and beliefs. And that is an important part of investing and running a business or a family too, because there's a lot. If you don't stand for something, you will fall for a lot.
Absolutely. And you brought up a great point. I know that we had talked, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, or whatever it was, about how we get to, do blank. And like for you, like, dropping off your kids at school, some parents complain. It's like, no, you get to do that. Like, we get to go to work. Like, there's so many people that are sitting around going, gosh, I wish I just had a job. I wish someone offered me a job. If you get to go to work every day, like, what a privilege. Even if it's a crappy job, then you get to go and keep working to get to the next one. Or you get to, do whatever it is. But it just reframing that stuff, like, we get to live in this country that's full of all these problems and this and that. But we get to do these things, and you and I get to talk about how, to help people, and how people can start taking care of themselves financially, and how we can help them in, what I call legal emergencies. And I'm sure you've had to deal with people coming to you in financial emergencies.
And hey, I don't have any investments to plug or advertise, but the only thing I would share, and maybe we can provide a link in the show notes, but the letter I just wrote, which is really from both of us, because we have the exact same belief system, to my graduate. You and I just had a couple high school graduates. Well, I got a college graduate in the real world now. And I simply shared my playbook and notes that we've learned of advice to that workforce, because that career path, and don't get intimidated to know what it is right away. And some of us take a long time. There's a lot of startup business owners. Actually, the most successful of them are 50 or older, not the 20s or 30s. So it is not too late if you're listening to this. But I wrote that letter and I shared some of those stories. And I do give credit to, since we love hoops, Ernie Johnson, when talking, and he's been through a lot, and he does a lot, and he gives a lot. And we both believe that's the rent we pay to be on this earth. I mean, we better, success unshared is failure. So he said, I am lucky because I have a get-to job. I don't got to, I get to do this. Finding that sweet spot with your work and the people that you surround yourself with, I guarantee you will make the investments secondary.
Absolutely. I love that. And so let me ask you this. When there's, like you were talking about, there's tons of confusion, there's ads everywhere. Now with social media, there's ads for other financial mechanisms and advice, and what to do, what not to do, how to get rich quick, or do this or that. What about the savings or investing apps like Acorns, or I don't know if I'm sure Robinhood is an app, but all these different apps. I use one personally it's called Acorns, and every time I use my debit card, the change, like let's say something's $1.50, the other 50 cents of that second dollar goes into a fund. And so I'm starting to see it accumulate, and I like it. But from your perspective, how do you feel about those and the average person using those? What's your advice?
Well,
on those?
as the resident digital dinosaur, I'm going to defer to you on all apps, and you're a lot hipper than me. I don't have any idea, and I have actually heard very good things about that one. Any nudge, and I think it's also just back to the stoicism and living life, any nudge and habit forming ritual, and if technology can help, all the better. I think we've also learned, and I will give a word of caution, in the financial world, there is a lot of too good to be true apps, suggestions that do not stand the test of time. Right. I mean, the closest I came to sweating out an answer for that is, I think, to make this more accessible to people. And it delights me when that guy who's admiring your score on the golf course and then laughing at my triple digit score, the fact that he could invest $25 even in the best app for me is something called an ETF, where it makes this more accessible to people, where that stands for exchange traded fund, to get the best of ideas from anybody in the world, where it could be hundreds of different companies in one ticker and pay less taxes than mutual funds for the last 50 years. That makes it more accessible much quicker for that first extra $25, like you just described. So yes, I part of this does involve, maybe to your broader point, be curious, read, listen, learn. You can't just throw it over your shoulder and hope for the best and blame the market if it doesn't work. I think curiosity is the killer app, really. I mean, we both read voraciously, and I'd suggest anybody do that. If they have a little interest in investing, read. And I'm happy to share some of the resources, and we can be linked up. And I love that, because there's nothing more exciting than a new investor to me.
Yeah, no, and I want everyone to make sure you follow and subscribe to Ryan's podcast, the Freedom Day podcast, because him and who's the guy that you're on with most of the
Jackson
time?
Wood. And we have a letter that goes out to all family, friends, and partners. You do not have to be a partner, but we share an open playbook. It's a simple email that you can get on our site. We're happy to share it all.
And y'all, I mean, I love your podcast, and it's always, if I can understand it, then I think anybody can, because I try to watch, some of the market shows, and it's way over my head. But when I listen to y'all and you talk about, taking care of yourself financially, I can even understand it. So I highly suggest anyone who's interested in learning what Ryan's already talking about, tune in, watch his podcast. He's got a ton. He's an old soul, and they're awesome. I love them. One more thing I wanted to cover before I let you go, I know you're busy, is let's say that, someone who's, again, like I was when I came to you, 50 something, I didn't have any, 401k, I didn't have any of this stuff, who should or what should they watch or on podcasts besides yours, obviously, but reading, what should they look at to just get started? What's something that might get them started doing that?
Well, that's a curveball for you, because it's like the fish that can't see the water. I'll tell you, how about this? Because this is a new podcast, right? What episode are you on right here?
Yeah, brand new. Number 1.
Okay.
No, number 2.
Okay, so because you have some loyal followers that have been able to trust you for so long, so what I will do, and it is one of my favorite answers. So a bunch of friends of mine, some like-minded. So rather than go in some blind website and try to learn the whole thing, so we put together a book where each of us separately, very different answers to your question, said exactly how they got started. And for you, for this podcast, how about I send you a box and you can share those books with anybody?
Oh my God,
and if maybe that means you have to do a trivia, to like some sort of, or guess the score of the Longhorns Georgia game, or I don't know how you want to have fun with that, because I'm not giving all of them away for free. Like, there's a little meritocracy here. Let's see what they got. But I'll share with you that book. It's my favorite answer, and not because I'm just one. It's all everybody's best answers and that, by the way, is whether you're investing in any business or fund. If I only had one question to ask, which is probably even better than a website, because the data on this, not to mention the feelings, which will make sense when you hear this, the data on this is the number one best way to find an outperforming fund, which is probably the exact same thing in business. find out who has most of their own skin in the game. It's a fascinating fact that like 2/3 of all mutual funds, their own managers don't have a nickel of their own money in their own fund.
Right.
Well, when you find an owner operator, it's the same exact data in the business world. I mean, Ralph does not punch out at 5 o'clock for a good reason. An owner operator business, he is highly incented to take exceptionally good care of people and is rewarded as such. Find those people in every walk of life. Find the chef, instead of picking amongst the menu, ask the chef what he's eating. Let's go sit with him and find out. That's the best way I've found in my life to run into a little bit more luck. But we do try to aggregate the best of everything we're reading, to your question, in this Freedom Day family letter that I like. It's not just my voice, but we chop up a lot of good stuff, and I'm happy to share it with anybody.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I really, really appreciate you taking time. I know you're busy, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And of course, you are always welcome on any time you want to discuss financial stuff or anything else. I look forward to seeing you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
You just learned something new. Attorney911, the podcast, with attorney Ralph Manginello. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode, and share it with family and friends who might benefit from the things we talk about. A new podcast launches every week. That means you get more legal tips, real-life cases, and expert advice. This is Attorney911, the podcast.